Today, I speak with a military expert at George Mason University, Professor Michael Hunzeker, who recently, along with a former commander of Taiwan's armed forces, wrote an article in War on the Rocks calling for a territorial defense force in Taiwan. I asked him why he thinks a territorial defense force is what Taiwan needs.
I think at its essence, we argue that territorial defense is an appropriate strategy or idea for Taiwan for a couple of reasons. The first is that we think it is the strongest possible symbol and signal that the Taiwanese people are willing, ready, and able to provide for their own defense, to fight for their homes and their communities, and that by sending this signal, you can actually increase the deterrence ability of the country in order to signal to any potential adversaries that it's just not worth the fight. And the second piece is that even if an adversary, an enemy, an opponent were to decide to want to attack Taiwan, the fact is that in order to achieve the political goal of actually subduing and occupying the island would require pacifying and controlling the people. And a territorial defense force makes this extremely difficult to do, and therefore buys time both for Taiwan to defend itself, but also for the United States and other allies and partners in the region to intervene and help Taiwan.
I've actually spoken to a lot of people who would love to be trained to be able to defend themselves, their families, their neighborhoods. What kind of training do you think we would need? Like, what are the basic things we need to learn, and how long would that training have to be for us to be ready?
Well, as a former American Marine, I have to say you can never have enough time to train, and the trick to it is to convince yourself you are never ready. But I think this is one of the reasons that Admiral Lee and I suggest that, and again, there are many ways to do territorial defense. I'm not suggesting our blueprint is the right answer. We want to move in that direction. But that our argument or our idea is that you should build these forces around existing special operations units and personnel, or either those on active duty or those who have recently retired or left the military. Because these types of warriors have a lot of training in conducting independent, autonomous, small unit hit-and-run ambushes. And in our estimation, this is kind of the ideal thing that Taiwanese territorial defenses should do. And that a territorial defense force, if properly trained in hit-and-run guerrilla tactics, that these would be especially effective, not during the initial combat phase, but assuming an invasion force can break through Taiwan's frontline active duty defenses and its reserve defenses, and they start to make their way into the city, that then you can see these territorial defense units starting to wage an insurgency, a guerrilla war, hitting not the frontline units, but rather the support units, the logistics units, the police units. And I think that's more likely to succeed and impose the types of costs on an invasion force that would, again, hopefully make them think twice before taking that first step.
So how many people you think would need to join for this to be enough? Or, a
well, and
force?
here is, I think, here's a reason for optimism is our popular conception of guerrilla wars and insurgencies is that it takes thousands upon thousands and thousands of people. And although I think there's still a scholarly debate out there, it seems that you can start a movement like this and really kind of fan the flames of popular resistance with just a few hundred or a few thousand well-trained warriors. But I don't think that the bar is as high as people necessarily think. I don't think the cost is as high. I think if the will is there, we can recruit a few hundred, a few thousand people to really get this program running. I think other Taiwanese kind of waiting on the sidelines will see this really does work. That's serious training, and I'm having a meaningful role to play. And watching what's happening in Ukraine and seeing that this can actually be effective, I think this thing could grow quite quickly, again, in a way that just helps us avoid these worst case scenarios.
So if there was an invasion and there was urban warfare, what do you imagine that to be like? And do you think that Taiwan could win still, even if it got to that point?
I think, and this is an important piece of the argument, and we should be transparent and honest about it. The logic of territorial defense is the logic of guerrilla warfare, and for Taiwan, the logic of guerrilla warfare in cities, mega cities like Taipei. And we should make no mistake about it, it would be horrific, and it would be costly. And I think we're seeing some of that play out in Ukraine. And so against a determined invader, I believe the Taiwanese territorial defense force, if married up with a holistic asymmetric defense posture, could really delay an invader, make it very difficult, make it very costly, and critically buy time for the United States and other coalition forces to intervene and help out. I think the training has to start now. This idea that the people will just spontaneously on their own stand up with whatever weapons they have on hand, and I've been to Taipei, they don't have many weapons on hand, and go up against hardened combat units, I think is a bridge too far. And I think psychologically, there will be that moment of shock and terror. I remember going into combat for the first time in 2003 in Iraq, and it is a mentally shocking moment in a person's life. And realistic, rigorous training, if you do it as much as you possibly can, it helps prepare you both as an individual, but also as a unit and as a society to absorb that initial blow, get over that initial shock, and then take the fight to the enemy.